Well, in what may just be the craziest group, at least in the Socceroos history, playing in Asia, Australia and Bahrain, played out a game that was befitting of Group C in the 2026 AFC World Cup qualifiers. A game, Chris Macpherson, that had general improvement from the Socceroos in terms of build-up play, chance creation, those kind of aspects, but familiar struggles in front of goals and a 3-minute cruel brace from Abdul Jabbar for Bahrain wrenched the advantage away from the Socceroos. And from that point, earning a draw and getting that 1 point to take us into second in the group from 2-1 down was great, but it really should have all been sewn up much earlier than that.
It certainly should have, Lockie. It was, as you say, a game probably befitting of our group. Realistically, is the best way to sum it up. On the balance of it, the Socceroos probably should have won maybe 4 or 5-1. But
Yeah.
again, the inability to finish in front of goal and convert those opportunities, despite, as you said, the fact that we did do a lot better in build-up. We created a lot better. Cassini Yangi got a brace, but probably could have had 3 or 4. And again, it's a case of what should have and what could have been for the Socceroos, and back to the drawing board. The good news is, though, that they do somehow, despite everything else, still cling on to second place. It was a weird one at times. I think Bahrain at one point, their live and running went from last live to second when they took the lead. So it just tells you how on a precipice this group still is as we head into the final few games.
Yeah, it's crazy. 6 games in, and we got 5 teams all within a point of each other. We'll break down the standings a little bit more later on. Let's go with Cassini Yengi first because you brought him up. I think his inclusion probably both would have surprised a few people, but also would have been welcome. We've talked about Mitch Duke and the fact that he's probably not the most popular of the Socceroo strikers, but he does a lot for the team. And Cassini Yengi comes in, and I agree. Like, it's not often you can see a striker score a brace in a game of football like that and still kind of be a little bit disappointed about his output, because I make it he had 3 good chances that he didn't put away as well. The one that comes off his chest and hits the post, okay, what more can you really do? But the run from Bajic down the byline that, cuts back and Yengi kind of just fluffs over his feet and doesn't get his shot away. Again, he scored 2 goals, which he should be praised for, especially the first one. He did well to go around the keeper. But it feels like it, and it's so weird to say that he should have scored a hat trick. But he probably should have. And, if they put a few more of those chances away earlier, and it's been a consistent issue, right, then, these kind of games would be wrapped up a lot earlier. And we don't have to run the risk of these kind of late freak goals like what happened today.
Yeah, certainly. I think, as you say, there's a couple of the chances that were almost gimmies that he at least needs to get a quality shot on target, if not score. But then there's a couple of others, and there was a couple that you didn't even touch on, where there's just chances that on the law of averages, you need to be, if you're going to be a top class, leading your nation's attack at where we expect the Socceroos to be in terms of getting to the pointy end and, consistently starting to perform towards rounds of 16s in World Cups and things. That's not the level that he's quite at yet. He is only 25. But as you said, I think there was a lot of people that were, I think the phrase I saw on social media this morning when the team was first released was surprised but delighted.
Yeah.
There's a lot of goodwill towards Cassini Yengi in the broader football community. Unfortunately for Duke, he doesn't have that at the moment. So, look, there was enough promise there that I think that they'll probably persevere with him. But again, it's a matter of, like a lot of things in Australian football, how long do we remain patient?
Yeah. And it's so hard in international football, right? Like, we don't play again until March. So it's so tricky. I agree with you. The other fair question to ask about it is, do we have another striker that we could put in that position that scores more than 2 goals? And the answer is probably no. So he's done well to do that. In terms of the other changes to the starting lineup, I think, as you say, we're all probably a bit surprised about the amount of changes. It felt pretty settled, especially coming from the Japan game into Saudi Arabia. Maybe the step down in quality of opposition prompted a few changes. We saw Hayden Matthews come in, who I thought looked pretty steady, to be fair to him. Apart from maybe a couple of leaky passes towards the end of the first half, he looked good on debut. Craig Goodwin was, I think, exceptional. He's been consistently one of Australia's most dangerous attacking threats when he's been on the pitch in the last few years. And then Anthony Caceres, as his Beige, I think all came in and held their own as well. And then Matt Ryan, who I don't think, honestly, can be blamed for anything. He had nothing to do all night. The 2 goals were freak. One was from distance when Cam Burgess had a bit of a loose touch, and then the others just a flick-on header from Hayden Matthews that hits the post. Like, Matt Ryan can do nothing about that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. On Matthews, I think there was a couple of people sort of castigating him for that header, but I thought he was, very more than solid in terms of his performance. Most of the changes were positive. I was reasonably impressed with Miller for a lot of what he delivered as well early on. He looked like he was creating well, which was good. As you say, Goodwin's just he's a key cog, and getting him back from that suspension was key. So it's going to be interesting to see where the management go from here in terms of those games. And again, we'll have another window of form to look at in terms of that. Yeah, the delay, I guess, until I think, as you said, the next game is March. So we've got quite some time to have a look at, players getting into the meat and potatoes of their seasons as well. So that'll be something that we'll watch. The goalkeeper one's always going to be an interesting one because, Gauchi obviously is the next generation. There's lots of people saying that Ryan's had his time, but again, he's been an absolute rock for us over a long period of time. And I don't think he did a lot wrong today. As you say, Cam Burgess probably will hold his hand up and own that first one. And it was a freak anyway. I mean, realistically, 3 of the goals out of the 4 in this match were freak goals that, 9 times out of 10, you don't see one of those in a game, let alone 3 of them.
Yeah, I was saying in the group chat as we were watching along, like, until Kusini Yengi scored that second goal in injury time, it felt like it was a 0-0 game with just 3 random goals that just happens. And, it was really nice early on because with all the talk about, how you set your team up, formations, build up, pressing structures or whatever, sometimes you forget that football is chaos at the best of times, right? And you can get these little cheap goals. And, if you're alert and Kusini Yengi was to put that away, then that can really help you out. Unfortunately, it didn't go the full distance and we still had a bit of drama to play out left in the game. But it's nice that he was ready to take that moment on. When we look at maybe how they played in general, I think playing out from the back was a big improvement in terms of how they were able to negotiate the Bahraini press. And I think it was Popovic talked about, or maybe it was one of the players actually, maybe it was Jackson Irvine, talked about through the break the last couple of days that's something they'd been specifically working on in training, so that in that first 5-10 minutes, when they're under a bit of a pressure situation away from home, that they are able to navigate that and be able to play the ball calmly. And Hayden Matthews actually had a couple of key passes in that first 30 seconds when they were building up that led to that goal. So congratulations to him for that. I thought that worked really well. However, I also thought that they potentially over-relied on it. There was a lot of times where they would get the ball into the middle third of the field, not quite have an obvious pass, and then they'd go back and trust themselves to be able to play through the press again because they had that figured out. And that was okay, but I thought they were also then getting into the attacking third and doing the same thing. And instead of kind of being instinctual and attacking and really trying to hammer away at the weaknesses or little moments in transition, they were taking the safe route when we had the 1-0 lead. And we didn't kind of get the impetus until we were then down 2-1, which is frustrating because we feel like if we could have done that for the full 90 minutes, then maybe we would have created more opportunities and created more goals and had a bit more of a buffer.
Yeah, it was interesting the way it played out. It very much felt, obviously that first goal, 38 seconds, I think, listening to the Opta stat, it was the fastest goal on record. Admittedly, that's only sort of 11 years or so that Opta have been doing the stats across that. But for the Socceroos, Bahrain then did really well to up the tempo and come back at us. But it felt even from that point that we were happy just to diffuse that, as you said, play it back out and then default back to the muscle memory, if you will, of what they've been practicing, obviously, in the lead up, which is, again, to fold back and then play the ball out. It also felt like we got a goal and we kind of went, oh, well, we've got a lead here against Bahrain, forgetting that there's 90-plus minutes to go, and that while we weren't parking the bus, we're very happy to play within ourselves, not take any chances. And I don't know whether that came from a comfortability point of view or whether it came from a fear of if we let Bahrain loose on the counter-attack, if we're pushing too hard and trying to back our chances. But it certainly felt like we weren't trying to go after sort of a killer blow, a second, or even a second and a third goal until, as you say, all of a sudden, bang, bang, Bahrain got those 2 goals realistically against the run of play midway through that second half. And we're then looking at, 12 minutes of regulation time and we're like, oh dear, we need to find something here. And we realistically need to find at least 1 to get us out of trouble, if not 2. And all of a sudden we started to look dangerous, which again, I would have liked to have seen earlier in that game at 1-0 and taken those opportunities, even if it was to see off that wave of Bahrain, that 10 minutes immediately after our first goal. and then we pushed forward. But there was certainly windows where the game opened up enough that we could have done that and really chanced our hand and pushed forward. But I just don't feel that we tried to push that advantage. We're happy to hold the advantage.
And I really don't love that mentality in a 1-0 game, especially with the randomness of not just football, but Asian football. Like we see this all the time. Like literally anything can happen. And as much as you want to, be comfortable with a 1-0 lead and be able to shift your mentality to protect that lead, we've got highly volatile referees, opposition teams that perhaps we don't fully appreciate and understand. There's so much randomness and so many variables at play that sitting on that 1-0 lead, I just hate it. It's never a good thing in my eye. And you need to be pushing for that second goal and establishing a little bit of buffer. So when that randomness and the volatility comes in, you still have a little bit of wiggle room. And of course, the blow to lose this win is even more brutal because, as you say, the draw somehow still leaves us in second. But every other team, so Japan on 16 points, Australia on 7, everyone else is on 6. So this is super, super tight heading into the last 4 games. And we had a really big opportunity to extend the gap on Saudi Arabia, who lost overnight to Indonesia 2-0. So that was such a big chance, and we've missed that opportunity.
We certainly haven't, and I think that's the piece, right? We view ourselves in a certain light, look at the World Cup, etc. I certainly think the view of the Socceroos internally and broadly in the nation is that we are, irrespective of rankings, etc., we should be on the cusp of that top 16 sort of bracket when we look at it from a World Cup point of view.
Yeah.
And we look at stages of the World Cup. But those sorts of sides have that killer instinct. They have the ability when they're playing against a lesser team to put them to the sword. We've seen some of that in like some of the Nations League. You only got to look at what England did, what Norway did in their games. These sides, when they're coming up against teams that are, what might be believed or looked to be inferior in terms of that tier of where they sit in world football, they're putting them to the sword. And that's, I think, the edge that Australia needs to develop from multiple facets. One, if we want to consistently build towards being maybe not a power, but a consistent performer at that level of world football. And 2, if we want to make sure that we get into the World Cup at the next stage and don't have to go through another stage of qualifying like we've done so many times. Like it seems bizarre. We seem to be able to step up when it comes to the World Cup, but then we get into some of these games and we get drawn to that level. And as you say, there's so much randomness that comes into it with Asian football referees, Asian football crowds. To be fair, there was a moment I had my heart in my mouth. I thought they were going to somehow pull out a handball for that second Cassini Yengi goal with how long they took. And that it wouldn't be unheard of. Like it's, and it's not to suggest that there's anything necessarily untoward, but the pressures of crowds and different things, you're playing away from home, you get that advantage. They got the crowd quiet. They needed to go on with it and they didn't. And that leaves them in a pretty precarious situation now where, again, another slip. We don't have that buffer now heading into the final few games, and they're not gimme games either, as we've seen here. Any team can turn up on their day in this group. That's why the group's so congested.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up that idea of deadly instincts when behind it, because it's exactly what we've been talking about on the podcast the last week or so. Is about the idea of the Aussie DNA and how we love to be the hunters, right, and chasing down the pack and be the ones that are underappreciated. And it almost feels, and I felt this personally when Yengi scored that goal in the first minute. It's like, well, this is a weird feeling, right? Like we're ahead early, like this doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden we just don't seem to be like ourselves. And it takes a couple of goals or things to not go our way to wake ourselves up and like, oh, okay, this feels normal. Now we're back, right? And now we can go down and chase a second goal. It's just frustrating. It seems to happen every time.
We need that chip on our shoulder. We need to be, it's the underdog mentality, the blue collar battler, right? Like, it's that whole piece of, write us off at your own peril. Go back to the rats of Tobruk and things in the world wars. Like, when we're underestimated, we're at our best. But when we get there and, we should have a lay down win, well, we have draws against Saudi Arabia, draws against Bahrain. I think the stat came out during the broadcast. Bahrain had never scored against Australia and Bahrain before. They'd never beaten us. I mean, they didn't beat us. We can take that from it. But they'd never scored. And again, yes, they were 2 freak goals, but that's what makes our game wonderful is freak goals and freak things happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you can't always be the hunter. Sometimes you're the hunted, and sometimes when you are the alpha, and you've just got to dominate and take that. And realistically, we should have been leading 3-0 or 4-0 at the point that those 2 freak incidents happen. And if they do, well, it's 4-2. Okay, batten down the hatches a bit and hold on and maybe score that late goal, and the game finishes 5-2. Instead, we're walking away with a point, and I don't want to harp on the point, but we've got our nose in front in a rabid pack in the last 3 games.
Yeah, and this isn't a quick fix thing either as well. This is a culture shift that Popovich is going to take a few years to try and really iron out. Some of it will be embedded in a playing group. Some of it will be about the way that the coaches speak to the players and how they talk to them and set themselves up for games. So it's going to be a long-term thing. But, if you want to be, as you say, a really high and respected nation in world football, and also try and be a powerhouse in Asian football as well, and continually making Asian Cup semi-finals and finals and things like that, and qualifying to World Cups with ease, then we need to get rid of that mentality, that's for sure. All right, looking ahead to the group, we've got 4 games left, as you say, just 1 point in it. You got to say Australia are still well placed. The opportunity is in our hands to finish second in the group and get automatic qualification. We play Japan at home. I believe Saudi Arabia still have to play them away, right? So that's an advantage. And then we have Saudi Arabia on the final day away from home, of course. But that next window, we'll have Indonesia and China, right? That's the one in March where 6 points there means that just probably results against Japan or Saudi Arabia could get the job done. So again, it's conflicting with what we've just been saying, right? We need to get 6 points from the games we're expected to win, which is not always the case. It's not so easy to do rather than said, but if we can get 6 points from that window, that's going to be key.
It certainly is. The one thing that probably not harms, but it kind of helps us, but it also helps Saudi Arabia is Japan only need realistically another result to all but secure their progression. They're sitting so far clear now. I think another 3 points would guarantee. So if they pick up, I think they've got Bahrain next, they'll head through. Then they'll play Saudi Arabia, then us. So that could be interesting to see how Japan take it. But again, they are at that top echelon for a reason. They perform when they're expected to perform generally, and that's why they're so far clear in our group. But as you say, if we can take those 6 points, that will sit us in pretty good stead. And the good thing is, every point extra that we claim, so taking 3 versus 1, Indonesia are nipping at our heels. China, I know their goal difference is absolutely horrific now, but they're still there, only a point behind. And so if we're taking 3 points from these teams too, they're really not quite death knells, but they're heavy blows for those teams chasing us as well. Whereas if we continue to, if we split the points in both those games, I have a feeling we'll probably be sitting 4th and in a pack with Indonesia and China clawing for scraps.
That's the other thing, right? It's not just to get automatic qualification, but a slip up leaves us vulnerable for 3rd and 4th place as well. That's how tight this is. So it's going to be stressful for sure. But Chris McPherson, thank you for getting on with me so early in the morning to get this out for everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Lockie.
Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you for the podcast on Friday.